settled in South Africa, and eventually married my mother. And here she was a South African lady. And then, yeah, I'm one of 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. So we were a large family, and we grew up very privileged. We had everything we needed, and my dad had an optometrist practice, and he did very well for himself. So after I finished school, uh, I went to Bible college where I met my wife, Rieta. And after that, we worked at the church for several years. And then in 1999, we went to a small country in Central East Africa called Malawi, where we have been now for 23 years. So Malawi is a landlocked country, and it's very poor. It doesn't have many minerals, so it's basically predominantly a farming community. Everybody farms, and even the people who work in town, they also have some land somewhere that they also have other people farming for them. So it's a real agronomy, environment that we found ourselves in there. So for the first 8 years, we discovered that there were so many orphans in Malawi. This was now 99 in those years, and the HIV virus was rampant all over the region, and they didn't have good treatment for HIV yet. So AIDS killed many, many people, with the result that at the time we were there, the population was 12 million people, but 1 million of those were orphans, and they were mostly raised by grandmothers. So we assisted an American ministry to help to take care of all these orphans. So we worked there at the children's home for 8 years. But during the time, we also learned a lot about farming. And that's where people from Zimbabwe came and taught us about farming God's way. So we've been busy with that for the last 12, 13 years now, training subsistence farmers how to become more effective in their farming enterprise. So our training is very holistic. We don't just train farming, we also train financial trainings, because if they start to make profits and so forth, they need to know how to work with their finance. We also teach on family. We also teach on faith, of course. That's the basis of it all. And we also teach character development and about personality identification and a bit of career counseling. So it's a very holistic ministry we have. We call it Crown Ministries, and it is situated in Blantyre, which is in the southern part of the country. Yeah, we have 4 daughters, and they all grew up in Malawi, amazing girls. They've all finished school now, and 2 of them are married. And so we're very blessed, and they're all serving the Lord. Yeah, so I think that will give you a good. My wife Rieta has been amazing. She's been supporting me all these years. We've homeschooled our girls, so she's been really great in schooling all of them all these years, and they've been very successful going out in the world. So we're thankful to the Lord for His goodness. I don't know if you have any questions. Yes.
Hello. What was the name of your organization? Sorry.
Crown Ministries.
Thank you.
Yeah, crown like a crown. Yeah, and we're part of a much larger ministry. It's also in the US. It's got a home office in Knoxville, Tennessee. and it's a global ministry. In the US, it's known as Crown Financial Ministries. But we strongly linked with another ministry in Zimbabwe, in Harare, which is called Foundations for Farming. And that's basically where we learned most of the things we know about agriculture. And that's a wonderful ministry based in Harare. So we're representing them also in Malawi. Yes. No more questions on our background. We work very closely with Youth with a Mission. There's actually a large YWAM base just a few hundred meters away from us, and we appreciate them very much, and we interact a lot. Some of our students and even our girls have gone to YWAM, and some of the students who finish at DTS, they've come to our training, and so there's wonderful synergy there. Yes, there was another hand.
I was going to ask what made you decide to go to Malawi in the first place. What was the process of that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, we grew up in South Africa, you know, under the apartheid, in the apartheid era, where blacks and whites were separated. I guess as a young person, I was not so aware of it because there was no animosity against blacks from our side, and I didn't sense it from the other tribes in South Africa either. There was really a wonderful coexistence, although apartheid was in place. It was only when I left home and I got exposed to the cities and the urban areas and other districts in South Africa where I realized that, wow, this is quite a thing, you know, especially when we started going to Bible college and we had black students with us in the college, and then we want to go somewhere to socialize, and then there's a sign up only whites, and then we can't go there because we have our black friends with us, and then we say, okay, well, let's go to another place, then it says only blacks. It was really awkward, so it made it interesting, but since I was young, I can remember that the Lord has really given me compassion for the poor. And when I met my wife in Bible school, she shared a similar heart, and she felt that she really wanted to go and serve the vulnerable people in this world. So when we got married, we waited for 10 years in Bloemfontein in South Africa, where we were serving with the church. And then we were able to, God opened the door for us to come to Malawi. Now, we knew we were going to be somewhere in Central Africa, but we had no clue where. And we really didn't know what we're going to do there either. We just knew God gave us great compassion for the lost and also for the poor specifically. So it was on one of my visits to the USA that the Lord started to make things more clearer for me. I was so desperate to hear from God about what is His call on my life. And we attended a large a large conference in Houston, Texas. And during that conference, there were amazing people who ministered there. You might recognize some of the names who were there. T.L. Osborne was ministering there, R.W. Shambach, and Kenneth Hagin, and John Osteen. That's Joel Osteen's father. And amazing people who were all together ministering in that time. And it was in one of those meetings where I was so desperately crying out to the Lord that John Osteen started leading us in a cappella worship, just spontaneous worship after Kenneth Hagin has ministered. And the presence of the Lord entered that auditorium in a way that I've never experienced it before. It felt to me that the atmosphere became very heavy and everyone was very quiet. It became almost like pressing you down. My heart started beating very fast, and it was, in a sense, quite fearful. And during those moments, um, I was so desperate to hear from God, and it was so evident that God's manifest presence was there that I cried out to Him, "Please, Lord, speak to me. Speak to me. I don't want to leave here without you speaking to me. I need to know what you call me to do. I'm ready to go anywhere. Just tell me, jump, and tell me how high, I'll do it." I was so sold out to go and serve the Lord. And then He showed me a vision of the continent of Africa. And there was a continent, and in the middle of the continent, I saw a large tree growing, one of the indigenous trees of Africa. And it was very big. And it started spreading its roots all over the continent. The roots went up north and south, east and west, all over the thing. And I saw the roots creating cracks in the barren soil of Africa. And then as the cracks appeared, I saw something like gold or shiny, something shining out of the cracks. Could be the glory of God. I didn't know exactly what it was, but it was bright yellow and it shone out of the cracks. And then there was an inscription at the bottom of that picture I saw, and it said, "The curse of poverty will be broken." And then I started crying, and I cried uncontrollably, and I didn't know why I was crying because I didn't have any reason to cry. But I know now that God was busy sharing His heart for the continent of Africa to me, and it was very difficult because I couldn't stop. I was sobbing, deep, deep sob cries coming from my spirit. And I felt how God felt about the people of Africa and the heartache and the pain that they go through. And it was, I asked the Lord, "So Lord, where do I fit in the picture? What do you want me to do?" And he only said to me, "Go and love my people, you and your wife." And that's where I started dreaming, and I knew, okay, well, God's going to do something in Africa, and I'm part of that. What it entailed, I still didn't know, but I had a mandate to love His people. So when we eventually found ourselves in Malawi, uh, it was a privilege to serve the orphans. We started with 18 orphans, and after 8 years, there were 130 of them living on our property. And social welfare, the government people would just bring them to us because all systems were overburdened with the huge number of orphans who were there at that time. And we provided schooling for them. We had to renovate. We were at the old military camp actually that was evacuated, and we had to renovate old structures. There was 34 hectares of land. I had no farming background at that time, so I never studied agriculture. And then the people from Harare came and they taught us how to farm. So I had to develop the land, put in, we were growing maize predominantly because that's the staple food in Malawi. And they would grind the maize up into flour and then cook a stiff porridge from that, and that's the staple. And they will eat it with a relish. So we grew maize, we grew soya beans, we grew sunflowers, and we had hogs, and we had cows, and we had beehives, and fish ponds, we had banana plantation, we grew vegetables, and so on. And it was a real learning school for me how to grow all these things and even how to work with the livestock. Uh, but the Lord really blessed us, and within a few years, we harvested so much maize that we didn't have enough space to store it in. We had a big hall where we used to have church, and we also have our general assembly meetings there. Um, that was the only space that we could use. So we threw in all the corn, maize in the hall, and it covered the entire floor about this deep. And we had to meet in another place for church and so forth until we were able to process the maize and shell it off the cobs. It was all manual labor, and then we bagged it and stored it. And it was just amazing how the Lord started blessing us using the principles that I hope I can share with you over these 2 days. Yes. So right here where we are, where I'm sitting at the moment, I'm not in Malawi at the moment. Me and my wife came for a sabbatical to South Africa just for a few months. And I'm in the Eastern Cape. So it's right on the coast of South Africa, on the south coast. And I just learned during our time here of a very devastating event that happened here in 1856. I never knew about this in the history. I didn't learn about it when I was in school in South Africa. But in 1856, among the Xhosa people, one of the biggest tribes in South Africa, there was a prophetess, and her name was Nanghuze, and at that time, she prophesied that the Xhosa people, the entire tribe, who were they did animal husbandry, so they were farming with cattle, and they had hundreds of thousands of cattle. It was a large tribe, a strong tribe, and she prophesied that she had a vision that they need to slaughter all their cattle and they have to burn all their fields as a sacrifice to the ancestors. And if they were willing to do this, that all the ancestors will be raised from the dead and they will come and join them in a battle against the British, the white people who were at that time coming into South Africa. So, and there were actually some Christian influence there too. One of her uncles was converted or exposed to the Christian faith, and he learned about the resurrection of the dead. And for some reason, this mixture of Christianity and ancestor worship brought this entire tribe to actually believe in this prophecy. And they killed 400,000 heads of cattle, slaughtered them, and they burned probably 90% of all their crops. They burned it down. This happened between 1856 and 1857. And the promise was that if they're going to do that, the ancestors will be raised from the dead and they will come out of the sea and they will come onto the beaches and they will bring new cattle and they will bring new goods and these cattle will be pure. It was almost like a purification of the tribe because she said there's sin in the tribe and the tribe is not pure. There was also a throat disease that was going on among the cattle at that time, and she said that was punishment from the ancestors. So they had to kill all the livestock and burn all their fields. And then these people will come. And they waited for 8 days. They said on one specific day, the sun will rise red in the east. And as the sun rises, the ancestors will be walking out of the sea onto the beaches and they will come and join them and they will bring new cattle. So everybody waited. The people actually locked themselves up in their homes and they were so scared what's really going to happen when the ancestors come. And they waited and they waited. The sun rose, the sun went all the way, and it set again that evening and nothing happened. And then the next day, they started blaming some of the people who refused to kill their cattle. And they say it's because we did not kill every head of cattle. That's why the ancestors did not come. So they started attacking the households of those who did not believe in the prophecy, and their cattle was also killed in the process. And it was devastating. As a result, they ensued a famine in which 40,000 people died because they just didn't have any food to eat. And it was just interesting for me to stand here on the beach at the same place where they said the ancestors will be coming out of the sea, and to look at that area and to just try to live myself into that situation. What total destruction and devastation. What bad results. I mean, it really has put the whole Xhosa tribe backwards tremendously economically. Um, Now we are in 2023, and what is shocking to me is that the same Xhosa tribe is still believing in ancestor worship, in spite of all this, in spite of this incident that happened. Um, and uh, they still have witch doctors who, when they get a dream that they should go and sacrifice, that the people actually still come together and they will still sacrifice animals to these ancestors. Now, this is not just localized to the Xhosa tribe. This I have found as I've traveled and lived in Malawi and throughout the whole region, that ancestor worship is still rife throughout Africa. And I'm always asking the question, Lord, the prophecy you gave me about breaking the curse of poverty in this continent, how can this ever happen if people have these beliefs? Um, and I was really wondering how God's going to break poverty in Africa. It was always a big question to me, because why would He show me this? But is He just going to do it? Will it just be a big revival that will happen? Are people just going to change their minds about their beliefs, or how is this going to happen? So while we were at the orphanage working with those orphans, and we had 34 hectares of land, and I didn't know what to do with that land. I really didn't know how to farm. I think I saw a glimpse of how God can do it. And somehow the people from Zimbabwe came. These were white farmers. They were commercial farmers. They were very successful. They were some of the best farmers in the world. They lost all their land because of the land reform policies in Zimbabwe. President Mugabe took their land forcefully from them. And they felt that the Lord was challenging them to forgive the people who took their farms and to serve them, because the farms that were taken in Zimbabwe were in total disarray after Mugabe forcefully took the commercial farmers off that land. He put the local people on the land, the Shona people and the Ndebele people, and they did not know how to drive a tractor or how to farm 1,000 hectares. They were plowing with oxen and very small little fields. So those huge, beautiful, developed farms all went into chaos. And the yields of the little fields that were planted were something like 600 kilograms per hectare of corn, Now, 600 kilograms per hectare, just to bring it in perspective, the average yield in the USA today is 14 tons per hectare for corn, the average yield. So, and the average yield of the farmers in Zimbabwe after they took the land of the white farmers was not even 1 ton, 0.6 ton, in comparison to 14 tons potential that they could have got. So when these people came to us in Malawi and they taught us very simple principles that I will go deeper into tomorrow. Because I wanted to just talk more about the challenges of implementing those principles today with the world view that we're sitting in Africa. So they taught us, and we went to apply what they taught us. And within one season, we had a 300% increase on the land. Just one season. Using the same implements, hand labor, using the same inputs, the same seeds as the villagers, the same inputs, fertilizer, but having a 300% yield increase. And it didn't stop there, it continued to increase. And when we saw that happening on our land, we got quite excited, and me and my wife looked at each other and said, is this maybe the way God's going to break poverty in this continent? Could this be one of the keys that God wants to use? And what was amazing about this farming method was that it was so simple. It was much simpler than the methods that the people were using. In Malawi, people grow everything on ridges, so you have to dig the soil and plow it by hand. And they make these huge ridges, and they plant all their maize and all their things on ridges. Huge labor. And because of the turning of the soil and the ridging, we have very heavy thunderstorms. And when a thunderstorm comes and you have like 200 millimeters of rain in one day, that loose soil woof, just washes down into the rivers, causing tremendous problems. Siltation, um, clogging up of our hydroelectricity schemes, and so forth. So we said, maybe this is a way God wants to break poverty. And then we did a trial. We said, okay, let's train 10 young farmers from the community and we see if they could get similar results. So we took 10 young farmers from our church and we trained them well and we sent them back and we said, go and apply what you've learned. And they did it well, and we went to visit them and encourage them. We gave them inputs of seed and fertilizer. And they had exactly the same results. Using a hoe, just a hand implement, planting, 300% yield increase. When that happened, we got really excited. Okay, so this is not just on our land, it's happening in the village too. And that was the start of a feeling in me and my wife's hearts that I think we want to pursue this much better, much deeper. And in the end, it became our life mission to see Malawi and the rest of Africa food secure using simple methods that we see how God is revealed in his own creation. And that is quite exciting. So this is what we're busy with all the time. We're training farmers. But I want to come back to the Kosa story. If you hear that story, how is it possible that one young woman speaks a prophecy and she destroys a whole tribe? How is that possible? What kind of power is there? And is that the same power that has kept Africa underdeveloped over all these years? And I think I would like to just unravel this a little bit more, because I can come and teach you now the methodology of farming God's way. and I can do it quite well. But if you don't understand the resistance to change and why people really are poor, it's it's not about a technology. That's not why people are poor. Africa is not underdeveloped because of farming methods. I want to make that very clear. There's a much, much deeper problem. I have other examples of things that I've witnessed with my own eyes. Once there was a big company who, in Zimbabwe, who felt they had a social responsibility, not just to make money themselves, but to reach out to the local communities. So they planted a very large banana plantation with excellent banana stock, a very good culture, and they divided this big banana farm into small plots, and they gave everybody in the community access and ownership of a small plot. I can't remember the size of the plot, but it was a large operation. And on top of that, they also put in an irrigation system. And as they were developing this whole outreach and empowerment, which was a beautiful thing, and there was huge potential to make a lot of money, they needed to decide where they're going to put the collection point of the bananas. So imagine 50 hectares of bananas. It's a huge farm. It's very intensive. There's tons and tons, hundreds of tons of bananas that will be produced. And they want the engineers who put in the irrigation system and the whole planning of this orchard, they said, well, it will make sense if we put the collection point where the bananas will be brought to so that it can be transported to the market right in the center of the plantation, because then everybody has easy access to the collection point and you don't have to carry your bananas that far. But then the elders of the community came together and they resisted this plan. They said, no, you cannot put your collection point in the middle of the plantation. And the engineers and everybody said, so why not? And they said, because our ancestors revealed to us that the collection point should be on the southwestern corner of the garden. So they said, well, that's all good, but do you understand what challenge it will bring to all the farmers who needs to walk from the northeastern corner of the field of the farm? They will have to walk 10 times the distance to bring their bananas to the collection point than the ones who are right there. And we don't think that's the most effective way of managing this farm. They understood that, but they said, yes, we hear what you say, but our ancestors have said the collection point must be there. There's no logic explanation why the ancestors said that, but it was revealed through one of the divining, people who were in divination. It was also a lady, if I don't remember right now. And didn't they, they tried and they tried, and eventually they were forced to do what the elders said them to do. And of course, it caused a lot of strife and problems among the farmers, because now others had to walk so far and others almost had to walk nothing. So again, that to me was shocking and an example of how what you believe can shape your economy. Another example I want to share is how Brian Aldrich, who is the founder of Foundations for Farming in Zimbabwe, how he struggled when he came to a point where he wanted to interact with the rural communities. He went to a village, and after he discovered this amazing technology and the fruits of it, He went there and then started training one family. After they were trained, they planted a little garden and they showed them exactly how to plant. They gave them seed, they gave them fertilizer, and everybody was excited and happy. And they left and they felt, wow, this might be the start of, a ripple effect in this community. If this family can do well, maybe all their neighbors will adopt. We went there 2 months later just to discover that the whole field is covered in weeds and that the family has done absolutely nothing in that field. I was shocked. And he approached the farmer and he asked him, so what has happened? We started off so well, but why is your field covered in weeds? And he said, well, when we went to weed in the field, we discovered some muti in the corner of the field. There was something, some ankwala, like we say in Malawi. It's a fetus that somebody has planted in the corner of their field that was witchcraft. And because of the fear of that muti, they refused to go back into the field. So that to me is another example. And Brian really battled. In the end, the only success they had was when they approached the schools. And one of the headmasters of the local school actually was excited about having them coming to teach their children and plant a demo garden at the school. Now, the school was neutral ground, and nobody put muti in the school's garden, and it went very well. Now, why did somebody put muti or which bewitched the family in the community? What is the difference? Why did they not bewitch the field at the school? The reason is that the family in the village was going to benefit and will have a bigger harvest, and everybody else was jealous about that. And they didn't want that to happen. So they went to a witch doctor and paid money to put that curse on the land. And the people were so scared that they didn't go back into the land. But at the school, the whole village children were all together. It wasn't the individual that was going to benefit, it was the class, and it was sort of a neutral place. And that garden thrived. So there was another example of how the way we see things and believe can impact our economic situation. Another thing that happened in Malawi that we saw was, there's so many stories I can tell you about this, but I'll just tell you one more. We trained, one day we went to show the Jesus film in a village. And after we showed the movie, 2 people came to the Lord, only 2. I was a bit disappointed. But we took those 2 people and started discipling them. And they joined, eventually, one of them joined the discipleship training school. This man was abandoned by his parents. He was very poor. He actually was married and he lived in a house that was previously a pig stall. He had 0.6 hectares of land to grow crops on. And because of his conversion, we said, let's teach him, because he's farming. So he came for training at our place, and we taught him farming God's way. He used to harvest 6 bags of corn, 50 kg bags from his field. After we trained him, he harvested 70 bags of corn the next season. From 6 to 70. Oh, he couldn't believe it. He was very diligent to follow all the principles we taught him. He barely had place to store all the maize. But what do you think what happened after that? What do you think was the community's response? The community dragged him to the police. They accused him of being a Satanist and of using witchcraft, because there's no way your maize can increase, your yield can increase from 6 bags to 70 bags in 1 year. That's impossible in their mind. He explained to the police, no, I went for training and I changed this and I changed that. And I applied everything very diligently, and that's why my yield has gone up. And after thorough investigation, the police found him innocent and they sent him home. Then the same community dragged him to their chief. They said, no, we're not satisfied. This man is using witchcraft. He's a Satanist. You cannot have such yield increase in such a short time. And there, another investigation was made and he was found not guilty again. But after that, he was pushed out of the community. People could not greet him. They were jealous of him, and animosity. Where in the past, when he was poor and nothing, and he was suffering, everybody was his friend. But the moment he became successful, everybody was his enemy. What is this thing that is happening? And I'm not sure if it's just in Africa, but of course, we work in Africa, so it's everywhere, not just in Malawi. I see this thing happen over and over again. So, because it's so important for us to see the curse of poverty broken, this became a point we studied and we looked into much deeper. And in the end, we realized, okay, this is an animistic worldview. And I'm sure you're all familiar with animism. You get basically, there's so many worldviews in the world, but I just divide them in three big worldviews. It's animism, secularism, which is the Western world predominantly today, and theism, which is the Christian worldview. So what is this animism? It means you animated. It means you're not in control of yourself. It means there's something else controlling you and your circumstances, and you really don't have a choice. It's basically the picture. You've seen these little puppets that people control with strings, and they make these plays with the puppets. That's what animism is. Whatever happens to you down here is not because of your initiative. It's because of the ancestors or the spiritual realm that's controlling you and your circumstances. Now, animism and Christianity is often mixed in Africa. I've seen that over and over again. And it's a big problem because with animism comes fatalism. It's an attitude of, I cannot do anything about my future. My future is determined by my ancestors. The ancestors are people who passed on and are now alive in the spirit in a different realm. They have a lot of influence and power. They are our mediators between God and us. We don't speak directly to God. We will please the ancestors and appease them, and then things will go well with us. And this was the motivation of the whole Xhosa story that I told, which created so much destruction. So, for instance, let me give you another example. In Malawi, if you see a maize mill, not sure if you're familiar with maize mill, so it's a place where people take their shelled corn and they get it milled up into flour. There's maize mills everywhere. In almost every community, you'll find a maize mill. But I can promise you, you will never find a maize mill started by somebody who lives in the community. It will always be somebody from another district even, or a place far away from that community. That will be the owner of the maize mill. Why is it that if you live in a village, you cannot start a maize mill there? It's impossible. It's again because of the animistic worldview. If you hear the maize mill running, and he's grinding up the maize, people used to believe that that maize mill is not driven by electricity. It's driven by a little man that's actually running and turning the gears of the maize mill. And that man in the maize mill is somebody who died in the village. And now he's sweating there, driving that maize mill. So why can't somebody from the community have a maize mill? Because the moment you start a maize mill and you switch that thing on and it starts running, it means you've killed someone in that village. And that person is now driving that maize mill. Now, when you talk to people, I mean, we are now in 2023, it's quite a developed and modern age. And you talk to people, do you really believe that? This is, nah, we don't believe that. But yeah, that's what we used to believe, you know, that's what's it. But although they say that, if you're going to start, you say, okay, people don't believe this anymore. So let me start a maize mill because it won't be a problem because people don't believe it anymore. And I go and I buy the mill, I put a concrete slab and I install my mill and everything and whatever. And I build my building and I start my maize mill business in my own village. Ooh, you will be in big, big trouble. The first funeral, or before you start the maize mill, and there's funerals all the time, people will accuse you that you have killed the last person who died in the village. And they will hate you. And they will throw you out of that village. And they will, right now, today, in 2023, that's what will happen to you. You could even die. They can even kill you for starting that maize mill. But if you ask them, do you really believe somebody is driving it? No, 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 that's used to be an old belief. But when you actually do it, you are in big trouble. So how come that, I mean, how is it that in our modern age, people still believe these things? Because it's so part of our culture, part of who we are. And it's so detrimental for development. It's a huge, huge problem. This is the one thing that keeps Africa poor. Uh, the jealousy factor. Why, why is there so much jealousy in an animistic worldview? Let me explain it to you in this way. Uh, let's say this is our village here around community. There's limited wealth in this village. So we can describe it like a pie, okay? And each family has got a cut of the pie. And they're all the same size. We all are lacking. We're all in lack. We're all struggling. But we're all happy. We survive somehow. Now, somebody like the person I told you about that came for training, who went from 7 bags to or 6 bags to 70 bags of maize. He comes back in that limited wealth pie, and suddenly he gets 70 bags. Wow, what has happened here? Our wealth is limited. This is the animistic worldview. So actually, what he did, he used to get this small slither of the pie, just like all of us. 6 bags, 6 bags, 6 bags. We all don't have enough food, but somehow we're surviving. We all have. Suddenly, 70 bags. Whoa! He took, look here. This is the size of the pie that he just took from us. Hey, he's stolen from us. Somehow, he's taken our maize from our field and he has put it in his field. That's why you have so much. We have less now. You ask them, but don't you have 6 bags? Yes, but it's less. Oh, but it doesn't make sense. And the people cannot explain it to you themselves. But what they feel is he has stolen from us. And that's where the jealousy factor comes in. Nobody is happy with this person. Everybody hates him because he has gone beyond their resources. And somehow, because wealth is limited, he must have stolen. So I have created tremendous problems for this young man. Yes, he's got too much food. Actually, he was able to sell that maize. The second year, he did it again and he bought his own land and he built a very nice house on his own land. So he grew and he went forward in life. He had a lot of support around him. Other people who prayed for him, who encouraged him, and so forth. And eventually, the village started turning around and they started to learn from him. But it took many, many years of him being abandoned and kicked out and sort of isolated. So you see, you cannot go and empower an individual in a third world setting. You have to empower communities. If you're going to empower individuals, you might be the cause of their death. But if you can, using the local system of authority, the traditional authorities, which is the village head and the village committee that's in place, if you use those structures that's already there and respected, and you come into and you impact the entire community through your training or through whatever program you do, that would be much more effective in the end than if you want to go and empower one or two. We need to find ways how to curb this animistic worldview. And of course, during our trainings, during our farming training, during our technical training, we keep on addressing this. Without a change up here, you will never see a change up down there. It all starts in the mind. So I think I just want to give you a chance maybe for comments or questions at this stage, so we can just interact a little bit. And then I want us to look at the biblical way of looking at these things. What does God say about this? Do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I have one question. You said that the man who was outcasted for producing the maize, that he was eventually able to make an impact in this community through just perhaps endurance or perhaps just retrying, or do you know, was there any sort of, like, I don't know, outside intervention or people who came in to actually show the people that this was able to be replicated, or do you know was it all himself just eventually able just to break through and show people like, hey, this actually was from what I learned, not because of something else?
Hmm. Well, what actually happened is he purchased a piece of land. There was an old house on it, and then he was able to the second year build his own house in front of the old house, which is a very nice house now. And then he broke out the interior walls of the old house and he started a church. He planted a church. And it was those people that came uh, that he could influence. And it's wonderful. I actually went into the community with him to visit several of the farmers that he trained himself. It wasn't any intervention from us or any outsiders. It was just God used him. Um, and then I could witness one person after the other adopting the new method with great results. And you did not sense that animosity in the community any longer. But this was many years. It took a long time for this to happen. And what I find that not many people have the endurance and the ability to keep on walking in forgiveness like he did. He really needed to stand strong in his faith for this to happen.
And this was in Malawi, sorry, or where was this?
Yes, yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
Yeah, I'm very interested just with this view. Obviously, it comes from the different beliefs that they have pertaining to witchcraft, fear over them, as well as the animistic views and ancestral worship. Is there just no allowance in that for understanding that him learning these things means that he will then teach it to the whole rest of the community? Like there was just no understanding that this could be spread. It was more things have to stay as they are. But I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah. Now, this I'm sure it has the potential to spread. Um, and when I look at that specific village right now, actually, there's there's been a lot of development that has happened. If you if, and it's not just agricultural development. It's it's for me to know where a village or a community is at economically, I can very easily make an assessment. If you walk into a village uh, and you see all the roofs are thatched grass and mud bricks, uh, and you don't see any clinics and so forth, it tells me something about the mindset of that specific community. It shows me that ancestor worship is rife here. It's a direct correlation with it. The people here live in fear. They live in fear to progress. And because the moment they progress, the jealousy factor kicks in, and then their lives are threatened, literally. So where I walk into a community where I see iron sheets on the roofs, I see more boreholes, and I see maybe a clinic and so forth, it also shows me that the mindset of these people somehow has been challenged and has changed. So there's definitely a direct correlation. But the big question is, how does this happen? And how can we see it happen more? Um, the only way this young man could overcome his challenges and the fact that he could stay in that community, didn't run away, and that was the fact that he understood what Jesus did on the cross. If he was not a believer, I don't think he would have had that ability. But he understood that his sin and his iniquities were nailed to the cross. with Christ. And because of that amazing grace and gift of salvation, he could have compassion on his neighbors and those who were falsely accusing him. And we encouraged him not to retaliate, but overcome evil with good. And he had much more maize than he actually needed. Of course, he could sell the excess, and with that, he was able to buy a property eventually. But we also encouraged him to bless those who cursed him, to actually take maize from his granary and go and give it to those who were jealous of him, and just heap burning coals on their heads. And that way and not to retaliate, not to speak bad of them, because he knew that prior to his salvation, he was thinking exactly the same as those people were. So he could have compassion. They were caught up in a worldview that was binding them. And he was there too in the past. So he was able to have compassion and not retaliate and not be angry, and to be patient with them until they could see his integrity. And then I think they laid the weapons down eventually, started to actually acknowledge that he was blessed by the, and then they were intrigued by it and they wanted to learn.
Thank you. So interesting.
Yeah, that's okay. I think it's a good time if we could take a break for 5 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone, and then just a stretch, a break, and we come back. Is it good?
That's good with me.
Yes. And I have a question for you, Johan. What is the best way to connect to you if we need to ask you something about class? Do you use WhatsApp or anything like that?
Yeah, WhatsApp is easy for me.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thanks.
Bye. Okay. So we're all back in class. Mhm. Good. Wow. Uh, I just want us to look at the secular worldview a little bit, just touching on it, and how it's contrasting to the animistic worldview. Secular worldview, that's the West and the world we live in developed nations predominantly. People are very driven and uh, very effective actually to accomplish things. Um, but it's very individualistic and it's very unforgiving. In a secular worldview, there's no compassion uh, for a poor person. The way somebody with a secular worldview looks at a poor person would be, you made bad choices, so don't ask me to give you anything. I made the right choices and I worked hard. That's why I am where I am. That's why I'm successful. So there's very little compassion in a secular worldview. Um, you you would walk over other people to be successful in life, and it's a very competitive society and driven. Typically, we see this kind of worldview in Europe and in America, in those kind of countries. Uh, and I don't think it's biblical because it's very clear that God has a huge priority for the poor. The poor is really on the top of his agenda. And there's a lot of compassion for the poor in God's economy. So secularism, I think people can become very lonely. There's no community. Where when we go back to uh, underdeveloped nations or developing nations, we see often that there's a lot of community happening, which is actually beautiful. People live together, they all struggle together, they support each other. It's not. I just want to bring that balance that Africa is not just bad. Africa is a beautiful continent, and the culture is actually really beautiful. But because of the ancestral worship, it's not helped Africa because it's based in fear and in shame. But when you, I mean, I feel very privileged to actually live in Malawi because I always feel part of a community. You know, all the chiefs around us know us. I can go to the chief anytime, my chief, and I can explain to him my challenge, and he will move mountains, you know, trying to assist me. Or if there's a problem in the village, like the cyclones that's been coming through that part of Africa these days, and people's houses have been falling down, and there's lots of challenges and flooding, or even during times of famine, these people would feel free to come to us for help, and we would love to help. Uh, During funerals, or if somebody passes away, the whole village come to a standstill, and everybody attends that person's funeral. It's not very conducive for being productive, because if you if that person is part of a business and he says, sorry, my friend has passed away, I need to go to the funeral, it will not be acceptable in a secular society. But in Africa, that's how it is. We all go to the funeral of our neighbors or people in the community. And I think it's a beautiful thing. But there could also be a sinister thing behind it, because the moment somebody passes away, he enters into this spiritual realm where he becomes very influential in this worldview. And therefore, you need to do everything to appease him. And if you're not going to the funeral, it might create problems for you. So there is a bit of things based in fear also. It's not just based in love. I was always often wondering, why would people come to somebody's funeral and say all these amazing things? Because people would stand up and they would comment on the person's life and what a blessing the person was for them and so on. But I very seldom see people actually doing that while the person is alive. But when they die, so many people would come and make positive contributions and comments about this person. And I've sometimes wondered, is it maybe based out of fear, or is it just really because they love him? So Then the theistic worldview, that's what I want us to just look into now. Um, what does God say, and how does God see this picture? And how does God want to develop a nation? Um, when Brian Aldrich, who was used by God to start this whole Farming God's Way initiative, uh, when he came to this realization, he only came to it after a very long and difficult journey. And I want to tell you his story. So Brian was a very successful student at school, and he was an excellent sportsman, and he played cricket, and he actually ended up being playing for the national team, one of the best batters in Zimbabwe's national or Rhodesia's national team in that day. He played international cricket, and he was a tobacco farmer as a young farmer, very successful, one of the best tobacco farmers in Zim. And he had his own land. He expanded his own land, growing tobacco. It was in the 1970s, and his children were going to one of the most expensive private schools. He was just a chairman of the sports club, chairman of you know the cricket club, and so forth, and very very successful and very well known. Everybody knew Brian Aldrich because of his fame with cricket. And then one day, as he was taking his children to school, they were boarding. He warned them, listen, in those days, smoking was the in thing. Everybody was smoking. And he said, if anybody ever tempts you to come and smoke with them, you must refuse because smoking is very bad for you. You will develop lung cancer when you're older if you, get into a habit of smoking. Uh, so, yeah, he was always quite adamant about that, and the children listened to him. But one day, when he stressed this thing again, his one daughter asked him, Dad, if smoking is so bad, why are we growing tobacco? Because isn't this where they make the cigarettes from? And he said, yeah, the place where we farm is marginal rainfall, and it's the soils are sandy. It's good for tobacco growing, but you can't really grow food here very successfully. And it's the best return on your investment to grow tobacco at this stage. There was lots of money in it. And I need to pay your school fees and all of that. I need to put food on the table. That's why we're growing tobacco. But she wasn't very satisfied with his answer. That evening, when he went to sleep, he was quite convicted about the questions she posed, and he also knew his answer wasn't very satisfactory. And he went to pray and he said, Lord, talk to me. If it's, tell me, is it okay for me to grow tobacco? And the Lord took him to 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31. And here Paul is writing to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 10:31. He says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it to the glory of God. And wow. And then he was thinking, well, is my tobacco that I'm growing on my farm really to the glory of God? Yes, it's the glory of myself. I drove a nice Mercedes convertible. He married one of the most beautiful girls in the community, in the farming area there. He was well respected, they had everything their house desired, wealthy farmer. Yeah, he had lots of glory, but is he giving glory to God? When people that smoke this tobacco from coming from his farm die of cancer when they grow old. So, hey, he got so convicted that night that he came to the conclusion that he will stop growing tobacco, and he made a promise to God that I will never grow one leaf of tobacco again in my life. I'm gonna set out and start growing food and healthy food, good food to feed people instead of killing them. Early in the morning, he took coffee to his wife and he said, "Ah, I struggled at night." He said, "Yes." He said, I struggled with the thought of growing tobacco, and I made a choice, and I made a promise to God that we will never grow tobacco again." And he was scared of her reaction, but she was very happy. She said, "That's it. I totally agree with you. I've also felt bad about this. Let's grow food." And that's where the whole tobacco story came to an end. The next year, they started growing food. But just like he said, it wasn't a good place to grow food. Soils were depleted. Tobacco is a very heavy feeder kind of plant. It just extracts all the nutrients from the soil. It's got huge leaves, so anything with a very big external growth, is a heavy feeder. It needs so much nitrogen and potassium to be able, and phosphorus to be able to produce these big leaves, and it needed a lot of attention. So the soils were depleted, and the food growing didn't go very well. In the end, they were growing big. These are big farms. I'm talking of 1,000 hectares or so plus. Um, so how people would do it, they would borrow an amount from the bank to buy all their seed and fertilizer in the beginning of the season. Then they will grow the crop, harvest it, and as they sell it, they pay the bank back and they keep the profit. So as he was borrowing money from the bank to buy his seed and fertilizer, when he looked at the yields he got of his food crop, he could not pay back his loan. And this happened a few years in succession, with the result that the bank approached him and said, "Brian, what are you doing? You've been one of the best tobacco growers in the country. What's happening?" He says, "No, I made a promise to God. I'll not grow tobacco anymore." And they were saying, "Well, that's interesting. Where is your God now? Because we're going to take your farm away from you um, because you're not able to pay your debt. We'll give you one more chance. Go back and grow tobacco again, and we will help you. We'll be gracious to you." And he stood on his decision and he says, "Sorry, gentlemen, I cannot change. I have made this promise to God." And that meant that he lost his farm, he lost his reputation, he lost his position as chairman of this and chairman of that. People walking in town turned their backs on him. His father-in-law was really upset with him, making such a bad choice and not being able to take care of his daughter anymore like he used to. He had to move to the city, and he went to rent a small flat there because they couldn't afford anything more. And he barely could keep his children in the private school where they went. Eventually, a widow phoned him. Her husband passed away, and she had nobody to manage the farm where they were farming. And she heard about Brian, and she asked him, "Would you come as a manager on my farm and work?" And he went. And it was a farm that grew food. But again, he found that the same farm was financially troubled, and they had a lot of debt. So over a few years, there was a threat that the bank would have to take that farm also. So you can imagine how desperate Brian was at this stage. So he went into a natural forest next to the land there one day, and he knelt there. He seeked God and he prayed desperately. He says, Father, since the day I reacted to 1 Corinthians 10:31 to do everything to the glory of your name, everything has gone wrong. I thought you would bless us and make the right decision, but everything has gone wrong. We've lost everything, and now we're at the point of losing a second farm and my job. And as he was kneeling there, he just became aware of the nature around it. He saw the beautiful trees, indigenous forest. He looked down on the soil. He saw the soil was covered with leaves that fell down from the trees. 1 year grasses had died off, and the soil was black and fertile. He thought about the soil in the field where he was growing his food. It was reddish and, and soft and depleted of organic matter, because the methods that they used was they would deep plow with the tractor and turn the soil upside down, and then they will have these huge clods lying in the field that you cannot really work with. Then they will come with a disc plow, and they will run the disc plow quickly over the field, and the disc would be turning, and they will cut the big clods into small pieces. But then it was still quite uneven. Then they will come with a rake, something with a lot of tills like that, and they will rake the land to level it out nicely. And only after that they will come with a commercial planter, and then they will plant the seeds in the soil. So it's 4 times that your tractor has to get throughout the whole field. Now imagine the cost of that on diesel, on maintenance, and so forth. Excuse me. So the input costs were huge, and then the food prices, tobacco was still the best crop to grow, but he refused to grow it. To get that kind of money for food wasn't that lucrative. So, and then they will burn the stove. They will burn whatever organic matter was on the field because it was in the way of the planter. So he was sitting there in the forest, thinking about the field and the bad state of the soil there, and then sitting here and looking at this beautiful, organically rich black soil. And he was wondering why. For thousands of years, nobody's plowed here. Nobody's put any synthetic fertilizers here. But look at the trees, look at the shrubs. Look, there's so many birds, there's little bugs everywhere and earthworms. And there's an ecosystem that's thriving here without man's intervention. So this must be a sustainable system. We've never come here to plow or to burn or to fertilize or to rake or to disc plow. We've just left it, and it's working. And it just started to come to him, and the Holy Spirit started to show him some things. The things that he saw was there's no soil disturbance, or very little. The only soil disturbance there could be was maybe the antelope, the wild animals that would come and run over the field or the soil, and their sharp hooves would loosen up the topsoil a little bit and break up the organic matter and introduce it to the topsoil. But there was no deep inversion plowing. We saw God also doesn't burn things. It might happen once in a while for a lightning bolt to strike and set a felt fire off, but that would happen once in a blue moon. There was no, the soil wasn't uncovered. The soil was always covered. Wherever you walked, wherever you looked, the soil was covered with leaf matter and annual grasses dying off, little twigs that's falling down, and so forth. So the soil was covered. The soil was not disturbed. There was no burning, and it was fertile, and it was producing. So he was reminded of a scripture in Romans 1, verse 19 and 20, and it basically talks about uh, how through the things that God has created, we can see his eternal power we can basically see something about God. Creation is showing us something about God. I don't know if anybody wants to read that. Romans 1:19 and 20. Is there anybody's Bible there?
Romans 1, right?
Yes.
Yes, I can read it. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse.
Beautiful, eh? So God is revealing himself to us through the things that he created. And there Brian was sitting in God's creation, actually touching it, looking at it, smelling it, experiencing something about God himself. And he felt like God is speaking to me here. And he started to feel an excitement coming up in his spirit. And he went back and he planted wheat. Now, wheat was a winter crop. He planted in the cold season. And it was under irrigation. And it was a good crop of wheat. And they harvested it with a combine harvester. And as they were cutting the seeds, wheat is like a grass. And then the stalks of the wheat straw was remaining on the field after harvesting it. And he looked at that beautiful wheat field after harvest, and he said, now, in the past, we would plow this, we would burn it, and we would plow it, and we would turn it back into the soil, and so on. But I wonder what will happen if we just leave it just the way it is, just like I saw there in the forest. So he said, let me do an experiment. And he started with 2 hectares. He took a rope, made some markings on the rope, 60 centimeters apart, and he tied a peg to the one side and a peg to the other side, and he put the one peg that side, pulled the rope straight across, and he made a small hole with a hoe. In Zimbabwe, they call it a badza, and they dug these holes right next to the markings of the rope. And then he put fertilizer in the holes, and he covered it with a little bit of soil, and he waited for the rain. When the rain came, they planted maize. So he would plant one line of maize, and then they moved the rope, dug another line of rows, of holes, then dug another line until they finished the 2 hectares, manual labor. And that maize started growing. Now you can imagine it grows in the straw, in the wheat straw. The wheat straw is still standing there. Do you think the water can run anywhere? No, because the wheat straw is so thick, so dense. Whenever the rain fell, it just saturated back into the soil. This wheat is dead. It won't grow again. It's an annual. It just grows one season. The roots are busy rotting. The straw over the rainy season started rotting, which added more organic matter to the soil. The maize were just thriving and growing, and he got 10 tons per hectare from that experiment. That means 200 bags of corn, 50 kgs of corn from 1 hectare. Now, wow, he was jumping up and down. So from the 2 hectares, he got 400 bags. Hey, now a hectare is 100 meters by 100 meters long. That's the size of a hectare. It's a little bit bigger than a football field. And from that, he was able to get 200 bags. On the other fields where they were still doing their deep plowing and their burning and the raking and disking and all of that, they got maybe 6 tons or 4 tons per hectare. While on this field, you got 10 tons. So we got quite excited about this because the effect was economically much less input costs, no plowing, so none of that diesel is wasted. No disking, none of that diesel is wasted. No raking. 3 tractor applications that he was able to cut out of the process There was a bit of extra cost, of course, that you had by hand labor with the rope that he used. But in that case, it was a good thing because there were many people without work around the farm. He was able to employ them to help him with that. The next year, he expanded the 2 hectares to 50 hectares. Now, a lot of people came to work on the farm, manual labor. They got an income, where in the past they were just sitting at home and couldn't find any income. And the cost in comparison to the tractor cost of 3 applications and the hand labor was not comparable. He started to make profits. He then expanded it systematically until in 1995, he did, actually 1993, I think, he did 1,000 hectares of no plowing, no tractor, no plowing at all. So by this time, he developed his own planter where he would weld blades to some wheels that he would pull behind the tractor, and those blades will be digging the holes, you know, much faster than people could dig with their hands. Because this was just huge. I mean, 1,000 hectares of cultivated land is big. And he started to win awards. The best maize grower of the year, best cotton grower of the year, vegetables, whatever they grew on the farm. Best soya grower of the year. He got one award after the other. The yields just went up to 14 tons per hectare. And it was amazing. The people around them did not like Brian because he actually showed them that you don't need to plow. But these white commercial farmers were very proud of their huge, big 4x4 tractors and big plows. And the deeper they plow, the better they thought they were doing. And they were boasting about it's quite a nice feeling to sit on a huge implement like that. Burn, 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 and you could burn the soil around, and you feel powerful, and you feel in control. And now you go and you don't do any of that anymore. So all the traditions, they even had plowing competitions and all kinds of things happened. All the traditions is useless now. So people actually didn't like Brian, and they pushed him out in the farming community, although he was so successful. But several of the farms around that farm got into financial trouble and were also sold out by the bank. And this lady who employed Brian, the farm was in a trust. This trust, they started buying up all the land around the farm. And in 1995, the farm extended to a surface area of 3,500 acres. And it was one of the best, most profitable farms, private estate in the world. And this is where Farming God's Way was born. When Brian saw all of this turnaround with leaving the mulch cover on the land, doing least soil disturbance, just small inversions in the soil to get your seed soil contact, and so on, he realized that this is an answer for Africa because you're cutting your input cost and you're increasing your yield. That's what every business wants to do, isn't it? Cut your overheads, increase your profit margin. So he went to the big farming community and he tried to sell this concept to them, but they all rejected it. They actually despised it because he was proving them to be wrong, and they were very prideful. But then God spoke to Brian from Isaiah 58. Now, Isaiah 58 became a foundational scripture. If you can make a note of that for Farming God's Way. Isaiah 58. It talks about the true fast. The true fast is not to go and sit in sackcloth and ashes, crying before God. And the Lord says there, you cry to me in sackcloth and ashes, and you ask me, why don't I hear you? But on the day you fast, you drive your laborers hard, and you are pointing the finger, and you're talking bad about others. And You're not removing the yoke of oppression. Isn't this the fast that I prefer? That you will clothe the naked, you feed the hungry, you bring them into your house, and you give them, you fulfill their needs. It says, if you do this, you will be like the well-watered garden, and the glory of the Lord will be there in your garden. There's many promises that you will read through Isaiah 50. But the fast that God is looking for is to reach out to the most vulnerable in this world. That's where God's heart is. And God is not interested in our religious activities. He's interested in our deeds. How do you demonstrate His love to a lost world? And Brian felt impressed by the Lord to take this, what he has learned, was rejected by the rich and the affluent people in the big farming community. So where did he take it? He took it into the poorest of the poor communities, and he started training the poor. And one of the most effective ways he was able to do that is through the rural schools, rural primary schools in rural places. That's where they started to put in demo gardens and spread away from there. And up to today, it's really a global initiative. It's been introduced in so many nations all over the world. It's just a miracle that from one faithful farmer in Zimbabwe, something that spread in his lifetime so huge and so big. And we feel very privileged to be part of that. Brian is the most humble man I've ever met. Such he's now quite old. He's got some heart trouble. Just got in Cape Town was for an operation just last week. And we had to get some stents in his arteries, but he's fine. He's still very bright, and just a lovely man of God, such a humble. And God has used his humility to bless many, many poor people throughout Africa. Foundation for Farming has now been adopted throughout Zimbabwe. The government has adopted it and made it national policy. And because of that, they've harvested more than they need over the last 2 years. And this is the first time that Zimbabwe actually was food secure after the land reforms that Mugabe did. These poor farmers living on the big commercial farms now are actually becoming productive because of the initiative of Farm Foundation. We are establishing it in Malawi, and it's been adopted by President Kagame of Rwanda. He's tasked the Foundation for Farming to put it in all the districts in Rwanda. We've been invited by the President of Madagascar to come and establish a training center in Madagascar and to roll it out nationwide there. Kenya has invited Foundation for Farming to come, and Uganda. Yeah, so there's a lot of initiatives throughout Africa. And that vision the Lord gave me in 1989, so many years ago, by starting to see poverty actually being broken, the yoke of poverty actually being broken through the gospel. We call it, this is the gospel with boots on. It's a demonstration of God's love in a practical way to people who depend on the land. It's for vulnerable people. It's not for commercial farmers. It's for subsistence, small-scale farmers. And of course, many people throughout the world are using the same methods. I know there's huge initiatives, they call it conservation agriculture. There's been big planters and agricultural equipment developed in Brazil and many other parts of the world where they can actually farm into the land that's 100% covered with mulch. It's amazing to see that. So what I can deduct from Brian's story is how God took a very proud and successful man, humbled him through conviction. He had a strong conviction that everything he should do should be to the glory of God. From there, God humbled him. He stripped him of all his reputation. He was rejected by his friends, by the farming community. And in his brokenness, God spoke to him and showed him a very simple methodology how God Himself is farming. And he adapted his farming methods to fit God's farming methods, and he saw a huge increase. Um, and when we look now at the attitude of the theistic worldview that Brian had, there was conviction. He believed in a creator God. He believed this creator God had a godly design, like he says in Romans 1:20. He followed his design, like we read you know, in Proverbs, King Solomon says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding, the things that you used to learn or you used to do. Acknowledge God in all your ways, and He will make your path straight. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. So trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Now, Brian was a commercial farmer, and he had ways of farming. That's how he was taught. He had to abandon all those things and start on a very radically different path. He trusted on the Lord when he sat there in that forest and he saw that the land is always covered with mulch. There's no plowing, there's no burning, there's a sustainable system, leaves falling from the trees and decomposing, fertilizing the soil again. He trusted in the Lord with all of his heart. He did not lean on his own understanding. He acknowledged the Lord in all of his ways, and then God made his path straight. In God's way of looking at the world, He's put us in charge of the earth. Psalm 24 verse 1 says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. It's not ours. We're just stewards of it. But He's given us authority and He's put us in charge of this earth. In God's economy, He wants us to grow and to be creative. There's no limited wealth in God's economy. God does not have this animistic worldview of wealth is limited. In God's worldview, wealth is unlimited. He's created you in His image, and He is a creator. Therefore, you can create. You can be thrown off in the middle of the jungle because of God's character and creativity in you. If people find you 10 years later, the place will be developed because of His character and His image inside of us. So God wants to break out. He wants to grow. So if we have a biblical worldview, we will not see a community as a capped little thing with limited wealth. What we will see is that each person, each little piece of the pie here can be grown. You don't have to grow it sideways. You can grow it backwards. So the pie can become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually we have a huge pie like this, and we can all enjoy more than enough and abundance. That's God's mindset. God is not a God that drives with fear like the ancestors do. If you don't appease me, there'll be a curse on you. If you don't bring food to me in the graveyard, people still do that today. They leave food in the graveyards for their ancestors. If you don't do that, there'll be a curse on you. Everything is driven by fear. God says, I'm the God of love. He says in 1 John 4 verse 8, God is love. And if we understand His love, there will be no condemnation in the day of judgment. So we don't expect condemnation. We expect blessings. He's a Father. He's a God of love who wants to bless us and break us all out into creativity and abundance. He's a personal God. If we read Psalm 139, how David describes God, wow, isn't it amazing? He fearfully and wonderfully made me in the depths of the earth, and It's too wonderful to me. You know my rising up and my sitting down. Your thoughts are too great. They're all written in your book. All my days are written in your book. He's a personal God. He knows of every hair that falls from our head. He's not an ancestral God that wants to consume us and wants us to kill all our cattle and bring sacrifices and destroy everything that He's blessed us with in order to have His favor. No, He's a God who did that Himself. He destroyed Himself on the cross. He sacrificed Himself so that we can be free and we don't have to bring those sacrifices anymore. He's a God that says you die once and that's the end of your life. It doesn't. Ancestral worship is not a reality. Ancestors does not exist in the spiritual realm. You can read that in Hebrews 9:27. Hebrews 9:27 says, "It is ordained for man to die once, and then the judgment will come." So this idea is of when I die, I'm sitting in the trees somewhere at the graveyard, or I'm somewhere still here in the spiritual realm, is not in a biblical worldview. When you die, you'll be with God. Jesus even said it in Luke 23:34 when He was hanging on the cross and the man begged Him for mercy. And He said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." The moment we die, our bodies die, but our spirit is in paradise with God. And we're not in contact with the world anymore. We are in a whole different place. We don't interact with our people anymore. No, you die once and you're in paradise. You're with God. There is something like the cloud of witnesses that we read about in Hebrews 12. That there is a cloud of witnesses cheering us on to finish the race. But I think it's talking about their lives. When we watch their lives, study their lives, may their lives be an inspiration for us who are still here to follow them in their faith. But the concept of having ancestors influencing our lives today here on earth is not biblical. He's a God of multiplication. He said in Genesis 1, verse 11, He says, He blessed them and He said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. He's not a God of limits. Rule over it, be fruitful and rule over it, or every creeping thing. So God has put us in a place of authority. He's put us in a place of creativity. He's put us in a place of abundance. There's no limitation to His creativity and to His abundance. He's put us in a place where He wants to be intimate with us, a personal relationship with Him. He wants to show us how to farm, just like He showed Brian. He wants to show us how to do business. He wants to show us how to do ministry. Jesus said, I do nothing unless I see my Father do it. There's intimacy there. There's interaction with God all the time. He's our image. He's our image. We're imitating Him all the time. And this is the wonderful, loving God that we serve. And I hope that you will become excited. Tomorrow we're going to be more into the method. How do we apply all these things that we've talked about today? But it was very important for me to lay this foundation of how do we think and how we see the world. So let's just open it up for some questions at this stage, or any comments you want to make. Feel free.
Thank you, Johan. And I think before we start, let's take a 2-3 minutes to think what we have learned. And each classroom, just take a moment to and find someone to talk about it, what we learned from morning to until now, and then maybe 2 minutes after, once you're ready, you could just start.
Wonderful.
Is that good? Yes?
That's perfect. Yes.